Hello and welcome to the fourth seminar in our series on striving for social harmony on XR in XR. So we're working with GuestXR on this. Huge thanks to them and to Mel, our chief editor, who unfortunately can't join us today. So firstly, to cover the housekeeping, I just wanted to mention that the seminar is being recorded. GuestXR has been gracious enough to host the seminars on their YouTube, so keep an eye out for this. And just secondly, I wanted to say, please feel free to add any questions that you may have in the Q&A tab just at the bottom. We'll collect these up for the end and have a short Q&A section that Andrzej will be able to answer any questions. Also, feel free right at the end to raise your hand if you'd prefer, and we'll be able to unmute you to allow you to ask the questions in live, basically. So without further ado, I want to hand over to today's guest speaker, Professor Andrzej Nowak of the University of Warsaw, and he's going to talk to us about social modeling. Thank you very much, Andrzej. Over to you.
Okay, let me then start my presentation. Okay, so I will talk about social modeling, and actually Wojciech Borkowski, Professor Bartkowski, also the University of Warsaw, who worked with me on social simulations, are also heavily contributed to this talk. So why I'm talking about social modeling in GuestXR? Well, GuestXR learns using reinforcement learning. And in reinforcement learning, we need many examples for the model to learn. And I mean, this goes into tens of thousands, or sometimes even into hundreds of thousands. It is difficult to get such a high number of examples from interactions with humans, especially if we're doing in the lab settings. So the solution is to use computer simulations to simulate the social situations that the GuestXR is trying to learn, and for the model to pre-learn, to acquire the basic knowledge of the social rules governing the situation, and then tune the model interaction with human participants. And it has been shown that such a pre-learning greatly reduces the number of examples needed for the actual learning. So for social simulations, we'll be using, or I'll be talking about agent-based models. And there are different approaches to computer simulations of social processes. I mean, macro processes may be described by difference or differential equations. The most famous are predator-prey model or logistic equation, and we'll not be doing this here. In the social sciences, agent-based models are most popular simulation tools to simulate social processes. And an agent-based model, also called ABM, is a computer simulations of interacting agents to study the dynamic of the social systems and factors that determine its dynamics and outcomes. So what are agent-based models? I mean, agent-based models build the bridge between the micro and macro level of social processes. And agent-based models allow us to understand how system-level properties and dynamics and outcomes can be explained by the properties of individuals in their interaction. And often in agent-based models, the micro level, the properties we assume of individuals are trivial, very simple. But what is interesting is the macro level, the system level consequences of what we assume on the macro level of an agent, an element of the system. So there are different types of agent-based models, and this is really a continuum, but I'll just concentrate on the two ends of this continuum. So first of all, some computer simulations, agent-based models, use complex agents. And complex agents usually represent the knowledge concerning the micro levels. So agents can have goals, plans, beliefs, they make decisions, they take actions. So basically we're putting a lot of processes and properties into agents. They often behave in a semi-rational way, maximizing their outcomes, making rational decisions, etc. And so basically in this type of model, we put our knowledge into the model and observe what happens. And there's a somewhat formalized system for constructing such models. It's called BDI, beliefs, desires, intentions, architecture. That is often used for multi-agent simulations, and that's used usually more in computer sciences. So an example, for example, as an example of a complex model, we can use an example from archaeology. For example, Dean developed a model of Longhouse Valley in Arizona, where there were historic archaeological data and some artifacts, and basically they represented every household in this valley, and they have input archaeological knowledge about agricultural practices, reproduction, and mortality, and into agents' behavior. And running the simulation generated data concerning settlement patterns and agricultural output, which can be compared with empirical archaeological evidence. So usually, very often in these complex models, agents have goals and they have actions, plans, and then they decide, they make a decision what to do to achieve their goals. I'll be concentrating on simple agents. And the goal of models with simple agents is really to study emergence. And the approach may be described as dynamical minimalism. So what is dynamical minimalism? Well, I mean, this is it is an approach that's minimalist because it attempts to identify the simplest mechanism that can produce the phenomenon that you are trying to explain. And it is dynamical because this phenomenon may emerge in a system through repeated interaction of very fundamental features. So complexity can emerge only in a dynamical interaction of very simple elements. And in this minimalist models, we are not trying to build realistic models of any social processes. This is more a realm of complex models. We are trying to get at the most basic mechanisms, and we're trying to brutally strip the model of all what is not absolutely necessary for the model to produce what we are interested in. So agent-based models are used to study emergence, how complex properties observed on the system level emerge from the interaction of simple agents. Emergence, it is really, properties of the system level cannot be predicted from the knowledge of individual elements in the interaction by other means than computer simulation. So this is really the crucial role of agent-based models. Is really computer simulations is to study the emergence, the appearance of unexpected properties on the system level that are different from what we assume on the level of individual elements or individuals in a social system. Just to give you the emergence in sociology, was defined by Durkheim in 1934, but in psychology, Gestalt psychology concentrated and emergent, properties of cognitive processes. And I'd like to show you a couple examples. So you can probably, if you look at this pattern, you may have the illusion of vanishing points. You can see the white points and the intersection of gray lines seem to appear and disappear. Really, this is not a computer trick. This is actually, you would see the same effect if it was drawn on a piece of paper. This is just a property of our visual system. So basically, so what happens, this property of vanishing and reappearing is a property visible only on the level of the whole of the system. If you would decompose the whole into lines and into gray lines and blue squares and white circles, there would be no change in the elements. Here, there's another example. If you look at this circle In the middle, you may see the illusion of movement and vibration. Again, this is something, if you would cut out the circle, put it aside from the whole figure, nothing would vibrate. So again, on the level of the whole, something new appears that was not there on the level of individual elements. And I want to give you maybe more interesting model of emergence. And I believe that one of the best model or the best example of emergence is a slime mold. And there was really a fascination in science in 2000 when Toshiyuki Nakagaki has demonstrated that a very simple organism, maybe less than organism, because this is like, loosely aggregated collection of individual cells, which is most similar to fungus. Is even more primitive than fungus. It does not even have it doesn't have nervous system. It doesn't have even a single neuron. Yet it can solve a maze. Well, before this, we believed that solving maze was a proof of the intelligence, and where we cycles were arguing, well, rats are intelligent because they can solve mazes. Well, so let me show you how the slime mold can solve a maze. So here you can see. A maze, and this yellow substance is just the slime mold. And slime molds love cornflakes. So here you can see some flakes or oatmeal. This is anyway, pieces of oatmeal are placed on the maze, and the entrance and the exit from the maze. And as you can see, in this process, I mean, this is so now the slime mold, I mean, discover its food, and it starts to consume it. You can see there is a lot of movement in the maze, and as you can see that the slime mold is starting to align itself, on the shortest path between the entrance and exit from the maze, which basically means it has found the solution. And you can see, well, this is something, okay, so this is the final configuration. You can see this ideally has, aligned itself on the shortest path, the solution of the maze, and this red pattern is the ideal solution. You can see that this is a perfect match. Okay. So, well, slime mold can do more amazing things. So, for example, slime mold can reproduce a pattern of roads in many countries. Here you can see how it does it in United States. Actually, here the pieces of oats are placed on the location of major cities, and you can see how slime mold kind of starts to create its roots corresponding to the actual road system. I mean, this has been done with both historic roads and also with current roads. It also demonstrated with rail system. And actually, this is very non-trivial because I think that finding the shortest pattern of roads is basically an NP complete problem. Okay, so you can see you can see how basically and the same property. I mean, it is very similar. The same principle as solving a maze. So here now you can. So what is the mechanism? I mean, how come that then something that doesn't have even single neurons shows a behavior that we might call semi-intelligent? Well, actually, there's extremely simple mechanisms. So each cell produces a pheromone called acrosine, and cells like the pheromone and follow its trail. Satisfied happy cells who have eaten produce more pheromone, and cells coming from food leave stronger scent trail. And there is a positive feedback loop. The more cells follow trail, I mean, then when they going to food, and initially they find it randomly, but when they come from it, I mean, they mark their trajectory with a trail of happiness, right? The pheromone, and they find then on their return, they leave the stronger scent, that the even more cells go this trail and so on. Finally, you can what you can see is that the roads or the ways leading from the food sources or that led to the food sources have the strongest pheromone, and because the pheromone evaporates with time, the shortest ways have the strongest concentration of the pheromone. So this is how the simple mechanisms solve the labyrinth. The same mechanism also works with finding the best routes, right? Between cities, because the cells of the slime mold just find the shortest path between different patches of food. Here you can see the same process being seen. So how do we know that this is how the slime mold or fusarium actually works? Well, this is a computer simulation of the same process. So you can see here, so each little dot is a simulated cell, and you can see basically how they spread and basically that they form the same type of patterns that we saw on the little video, right? So over time they will just recreate the same pattern of fruits. And actually it shows us the role of computer simulations, right? We have extremely simple element, just the cell that is moving randomly. It just likes the scent of pheromone and tends to follow it. It exerts a pheromone and it exerts more of the pheromone when it's happy. So, and this allows for extremely complex behavior on the macro level. And maybe I'll also show you, you've seen, maybe I can show you one more, I believe, very entertaining, example of slime mold. When slime mold plays the music, you can see there are electrodes connected to and sensors connected to different patches of the slime mold. The electronic converter of the signal to musical signal. Okay, and actually this is what's interesting, the generality of these mechanisms. So the same thing happens on the internet. For example, on the Amazon, you may see what others have bought, right? Which corresponds to where they went in their shopping space. And then, if you want to build an analogy to slime mold, and also ratings, which is basically similar to exerting pheromone, the expression of our happiness with the products. Google movement on networks organizes the networks, right? Those things that people search become more popular. In humans, we are very well as acquainted with imitation and social learning, when people react to rewards others get, and their happiness treated in a very similar way to rewards concerning their own behavior. So basically, expression of positive emotion in human is similar to exertion of acrosin in slime mold. So this is a very general. There are also examples. Actually, ants work in a very similar way to slime mold, using also pheromones. So you can see that this mechanism, which is extremely simple mechanism, works across all the levels, from something that basically acts on the level of single cells to basically the most complex creation of humanity, which is internet. Now let me describe to you the simulation that we are doing, and this is actually there are so many types of social simulations impossible to describe in one talk, all of them. So I decided to concentrate on the axis that perhaps is the most relevant to social harmony, which is the action of the axis of cooperation competition. That's the central axis of social dynamics. And actually this axis is even more important currently, as we observe growing social polarization, conflict that exists in all the levels, both within societies and between nations. And also many modern social problems, for example, the climate crisis can be understood in terms of cooperation versus competition, or maximizing individual gains at the expense of common goods. In this case, right? I mean, we increase our consumption in the climate case at the expense of, of a common good, which is good air. And this is well described by the tragedy of commons, or by the mathematical model of multi-person presence dilemma game, or social dilemmas. And also, when we are talking about social harmony in virtual space, well, I mean, this is negative or competitive social behaviors are problematic in the virtual space. And here I am adopting the definition of competitive behaviors of Morton Deutsch, who is a classic that basically introduced this line of work in social psychology. And basically he understood as competitive all the behaviors, social behaviors, I would say that you would call negative, aggressive, or problematic. And cooperative, all the positive forms of human interaction. So this describes our paper, and actually Morton Deutsch is one of the authors of this paper. So it is computer simulation of the crude law of social relations. And the crude law of social relations states that the characteristic processes and effects elicited by a given type of social relationship, e.g. cooperative or competitive, tend also to elicit that type of social relationship. And the typical effect of any type of relationship tend to introduce the other typical effects of the relationship, okay? So maybe it is not very clear what it really means. This is one of the most general rules of social psychology, maybe even the most general rule of social psychology. And Morton Deutsch studied conflict. I mean, he did his research just after the Second War. He was really very much moved, by the atrocities of the war. Said, well, we can never let such thing happen again. So he decided that it was trying to understand. He understood war as extreme form of competition. So he studied, all the conditions that lead to competition versus result in cooperation. And then when they isolated these factors, Deutsch and his team has studied, what are the consequences of cooperation and competition. It turns out that actually cooperation produces all the conditions they knew that they discovered that it's leading to competition, and cooperation produces all its causes. I mean, it means conditions that result in cooperation. So first of all, I mean, these are like self-perpetuating systems, right? Or, positive feedback loops. The competition produces conditions facilitating its occurrence, the same with both cooperating competition. And then that any component of competition or cooperation produces other components. So, for example, competition produces impaired communication, obstructiveness and lack of helpfulness, inability to divide the work, reduced confidence, enhancement of own power, reduction of the power of the other side, expansion of the scope of issues in conflict, and destructive resolution of conflict. Right? And the second part of the crude law says that, well, any of those elements has a tendency to facilitate the emergence of other elements. So we decided to build a minimalist model of the crude law. So really the model has the three, so we're trying to distill to the absolutely necessary minimum, okay? So really the model has three components. First of all, the negative interdependence, which is basically incompatibility between goals. So with one person And this corresponds to the theory of that was the psychological theory that was developed in this area, and Deutsch work on conflict. So first of all, negative interdependence means that, well, if one person tries to realize his or her goal, this interferes or make it more difficult for other people to realize the same goal. An example is, I mean, you know, different families share the same well, right? If one of them uses more of the well, I mean, the other have less water. Then competitive behaviors, which basically means, for example, which means any type of negative social interaction, for example, aggression. And finally, competitive orientations, and they may have, you know, many elements, many components, for example, lack of trust, negative perception. So this is basically disliking or even sometimes hating the other person, like a general negative attitude toward the other. Okay, and in our simulations, the agents, as you will see, live on a grid like a chessboard, and all the rules are local. So competitive behaviors, following social exchange theory, elicit new competitive behaviors. So basically aggression elicits aggression. Then competitive behaviors decay with a certain rate. So there are no supporting conditions. I mean, after some time, aggressions will cease. Competitive interdependence facilitates the growth of competitive behaviors. It means if there are conditions of competitive interdependence, so basically achievement of the goal of one person interferes with the achievement of the goal of another person. I mean, there will be more negative retaliation for all the negative behaviors. And then what is important, then competitive behaviors produce competitive orientations. So basically, if you start to behave aggressively, I mean, this will lead to, with some probability, there will be elements, negative orientations will appear. And then in a feedback loop, competitive orientations facilitate the growth of competitive behaviors. So if there is this negative orientations, for example, there's people who have negative attitudes towards the two partners have negative attitudes toward each other. I mean, every negative behavior, like negative interdependence, will lead to more retaliation or more negative behaviors. Okay, so we can really formalize the general statements. Then we can say that each process produces conditions that facilitate its occurrence, and in conflict with certain rate, negative behaviors vanish. With certain probability, negative behaviors lead to other negative behaviors, so they grow. When there is a competitive interdependence, the growth of negative behaviors is faster. The negative behaviors produce negative orientations, and negative orientations also result in the fastest growth of negative behaviors. All of this at the place where the conditions are met. So we studied the emergence of protracted conflict, and I'm going to show you the role of local condition, local dynamics. That on the average, there is no conditions for the escalation of conflict, as you will see in the simulation. So, but there are some places when there is a conflict of interest. So conflict escalates by growing exponentially in locations where the conditions for its growth are met, and dissipates from these locations. And it's sufficient that the conditions for conflict are met locally for the conflict to grow at the global scale. And conflict really changes the social tissue by establishing conditions for its proliferation, the culture of war. And this is the essence of the crude law of social relations. So let me show you this our simulation. You can see that the height of the bars is and their color is the intensity of negative behaviors. So you can see that we start with some, some intensity of negative behaviors. In the places marked by red dots, there are small dots, I don't know if you're visible, but the negative behaviors lead to more negative behaviors. So you can see that everywhere, basically negative behaviors vanish, but in these hotspots of conflict, they tend to grow. This is an exponential scale, so they really, grow to a very significant degree. Maybe you can see the appearance of little blue dots, and these are the appearance of negative orientation, social orientations, at the places of intense conflict. So you can see that in the places where there's lots of conflict, the negative orientations start to appear, and basically people start to have negative attitude. They start to hate each other. Right now, this process continues, and after some moment you will see that what we have done. We have now, we say, okay, we kind of intervene in the conflict. What we do, we erase all the negative behaviors. For example, let's suppose there are some peacekeeping forces, and we have given enough, let's say, subsidies. There's no more conflict of interest. But you can see that the conflict now, so there's no conflict of interest. There are no negative behaviors, but you can see that the conflict seems to be recreated in the places where it existed before. Why? Because the negative social orientation stayed there, right? So basically now we have a situation of the recreation of conflict. Okay, so let's go. So this is here, you can see that here the yellow dot show the initial location of the conflict of interest. I mean, in the early stage of simulation, you can see that basic conflict grows exactly at the place when there is negative interdependence, which means conflict of interests. You can see that everywhere it vanishes, but it grows in these places. This creating of negative orientation. These blue dots are negative orientations. They're much better visible in this font. And you can see that now we have erased that. You can see the negative orientations and behaviors. And here you can see what happens, right? You have exponential growth in this very specific locations of negative behaviors that kind of diffuse and randomly diffuse to other places in society. And you can see this is the blue line, and the pink line shows the growth of negative orientation. So you can see basically the negative orientations. I mean, that the negative behaviors generate negative orientations. Okay. Now this is the reset. Okay, and now you can see that again that competitive behaviors seem to reappear or be recreated at the places of initial location of conflict. So you can see this on the graph, right? So you can see that here, that the blue line, I mean, we have reset, there are no more negative behaviors, but because but the conflict has been imprinted into society by the negative social orientations. You can see that immediately, just in a few steps, it is recreated to its original values. Okay. So what do we see? Well, we see that conflict tends to be recreated in location when it existed before, because in this location there exist conditions for its fast growth. And each condition facilitates the other conditions. So the second part of the crude law follows from the first part. Conflict can grow because negative behaviors occur exactly in places where the facilitated conditions exist. And if we increase the rate of simulation of behaviors, so the negative behaviors, are exhibited in the places when there's no conditions, when there are low conditions or no conditions for negative reciprocity, the conflict disappears. So conflict can develop only in niches of facilitating factors where negative behaviors can achieve high concentration. So disruption of locality disrupts the conflict. Conclusions. So the presented simulation model based on the crude law may explain why intractable conflicts may be so immune to interventions. The persistent competitive orientations, if they're intense enough, can create a positive feedback loop that forms a self-sustaining system of conflict. So basically, that's basically these are conclusions. The other model I would like to present to you is the model of the rationality of honor culture, and basically, which also has asked about how can, on the one hand, it asks, well, why can culture of honor that seems to be very irrational survive, and what is its function, what is the rationality of it. And our second question is basically, how can societies prevent aggression? So we know that psychological and social processes strongly depend on culture. And Nisbet and Cohen has shown that the culture of honor strongly influences behavior in conflict. And basically, there's even not in experimental studies, they have shown that people coming from the honor culture, so this in their study, this was south of US, react to provocation in a way that's disproportional to the size of the provocation. The just kind of provocation sets them in motion, and regardless of anything, they feel like they have to take revenge. So our question is, what is the benefit of adopting culture of honor? So culture of honor is, of course, much more complex. Again, we're following here the principle of dynamical minimalism. So we think that culture of honor basically prioritizes honor over material gain or safety. And we operationalize it as individuals always fight back when faced with aggressive challenge, if they stay little chance of winning the confrontation. So even if totally in the face of totally losing the battle, they're still willing to pick up the fight. And in certain circumstances, a good reputation may have more value than the tangible goods in the long run. So what is our simulation? Well, we have modeled outcomes of interaction between the four agent strategies that, by the way, correspond to the four types of culture defined by social behavior defined by Weber. But first of all, our first culture is aggression culture. So so agents coming from aggression culture always attack agents perceived as weaker or who have a lower reputation. They rarely attack others who are perceived as stronger. So basically the rule is, if you find someone, if you come from aggressive culture, you attack the people you perceive that are weaker than you. The honor culture, they rarely start confrontation, but always fight back when attacked, even when they perceive themselves as being much weaker than their attacker. The third culture, which is the dignity culture, right? They call authorities when attacked. So they do not fight back themselves, but basically they call the police. And the rational culture fights back when they perceive themselves to be stronger than the challenger, but they surrender when they perceive themselves to be weaker. So what are the variables in that? Well, first of all, strengths. This is the amount of resources the engine has. If the strengths fall below the specified limit, 5%, the agent dies. Strength is lost in fights, especially when the fight is lost. It is gained with time in the process of recovery. Okay. Our second variable is reputation. So this is subjectively perceived strengths of the agent. It determines the behavior of the other agents toward the actor. Right, so people really don't see the actual strengths. What they see is the reputation in others. Reputation is gained by challenging others, picking up a fight when challenged, and especially by winning a fight. It is lost by giving up when challenged, by calling authorities when challenged, and by losing a fight. And we have like 4 different strategies: aggressive, honor, dignity, and rational. In our simulations, we use Monte Carlo simulations when we kind of, pick a random agent, decide, all these parameters. Run through the agent through the process of, following the agent's rule, and then we pick another agent. So this is probably the most commonly used process on the serial computer to simulate parallel social process. And there's evolutionary dynamics. Simply, if an agent has lost all its resources, the agent is eliminated. The agent is eliminated, and then another agent is created with the probability, inherits the culture of one of the neighboring agents. So let me show you a simulation. The red color here, is the aggressive culture. Each red dot is an aggressive agent. The green color, each green dot is an agent coming from the honor culture. Blue is the interest culture, the one who call authorities or police, and black agents are the one who are rational. Okay. So let me show you the dynamics of the simulation. You can see that aggression culture starts to dominate, and immediately, as soon as there's a lot of aggressive agents, honor culture is winning with them. But then you can see that other cultures are winning with the honor culture. And again, in another cycle, right? So we can say there's a cyclic behavior when basically, if not for the honor culture, the aggressive culture would dominate the society. We can see this dynamic in the following graph. You can see this in this sequence, right? You can see here on the upper left, little dot of aggressive culture, which grows in time, right? And another and in C, there's a lot of red culture dominate the society, but you can see that on the border of the red, I mean the honor culture of the aggressive culture, honor culture is starting together. Honor culture can wins with the aggressive culture, dominate the society, but the rational agents are win with the aggressive, with the honor agents. And again, we have, here, most of the agents are aggressive or individualists. And you can hear that the scenario will repeat, because on the lower left, you can see a little cluster of aggressive culture again. So we see kind of a scenario of oscillating dominance. The culture of aggression wins with the rational culture. The culture of honor wins over the culture of aggression. In the absence of the culture of aggression, the rational culture wins over the honor culture. Due to dynamic relationship between aggression, honor, and rational cultures, the three cultures oscillate. Okay, and here you can see the oscillation. The red is the aggressive culture, the green is the honor culture, the blue is the rational culture. So what we find is that one of the variables that we manipulated was effectiveness of the strength of the state. It means, effectiveness of police. I mean, this was operational as the probability that if an agent calls a police to intervene, they actually arrive and help. And turns out that even with moderate authority effectiveness, interest culture gains functionality, keeps the aggressive culture from growing. And oscillations in the presence of a strong state, oscillations of the honor and aggressive cultures are dampened. None of these cultures ever reach high values. So even when effectiveness of authorities is relatively low, if they're responding at all, it's enough about, in their effectiveness enough if there's about 30%. Societal dynamics are altered such that the number of both aggressive and honor-oriented cultures are kept low. So really, we can talk about societies which are based on self-actions versus institutions. And our simulations seem to show two types of sustainable social systems. So aggressive culture, first of all, aggressive culture wins with the rational culture if it is not controlled. It fully dominates. But effectiveness of authorities, the strength of the state, decides how aggressive culture is controlled. So there are two different scenarios. So based on honor culture can control aggressive culture, but it does not eliminate it. These two cultures are antagonistic but symbiotic. So basically, Another one is based on state control. Strong state, effective authorities, eliminates both aggressive and honor culture. And what is left is mixture of interest and rational cultures. So how does, what is the functionality of honor culture? Why can they win with the aggressive culture? Because honor culture always fights back when attacked, and with some probability they win fights, the reputation grows. Due to the high reputation, honor culture individuals are less frequently attacked, allowing them more time between confrontation to regain strength. As the results, they are stronger for next confrontation with the aggressive culture, so they win and gain reputation. This positive feedback loop results in the rapid growth of the culture of honor. Okay. So honor culture can control aggressive culture, but it doesn't dominate. But somehow honor culture and aggressive culture are antagonistic by symbiotic. And high effectiveness of authorities eliminates both the aggressive and the honor culture. Okay, so the last thing I want to briefly mention is our current work related done in GuestXR. Basically, we're simulating tragedy of common social dilemmas. So the conflict between individual and common goods. Individual consumption depletes a common resource to the degree that the resource cannot grow. I mean, for example of pastures in Scotland. And we are especially interested in climate change, which may be understood as a strategy of commons. So basically, we have two types of agents that have characteristics of greed, which is simply how much they consume, and readiness for punishment for overconsumption. And the agents move randomly. And when they find something to eat, they can eat more or less, depending on the gene of greed, right? If they're greedy, they can eat the whole, or the large part of the resource. The less greedy, they eat only part of this. And finding another is that they can block him or her for a few steps as a punishment, depending on the trait of punishment. When they all there, and we are using the evolutionary dynamics, simply that agents that run out of resources acquire characteristics of those who kind of share their resources with them. Okay? This is, you can see the simulation. I mean, the green squares are the resources. You can think of, well, plants to eat, and the circles are the agents. The size of the agent means how much resources they have. The more red they are, the more greedy they are. The more blue they are, the more they want to punish others. Okay, so basically, I can show you one short scenario of failure. Basically, when they exhaust the resources, and there is a catastrophe, right? You can see that basically, I mean, that agent, I mean, there's basically no resources. Agent, very small resources. They are greedy. You can see they're red, but they're, all they are hungry, right? They cannot really. They exhausted their resources. They ruined their environment. In the second scenario, you can see. And this is failure scenario. I mean, this is you can see that basically the two genes do not evolve, and it ends in the end in chaos. This is the scenario of success. You can see. I mean, and very shortly, I'll tell you that in the scenario of success, the main difference is that the resources are they replicate less, and initially there's less resources, so the environment is tougher. You can see that here all the agents, have similar amount of resources. They are quite satisfied, and there's plenty of resources left, right? So this is a success scenario. You can see that what happened as a result of evolution, they learned kind of to consume less. This is this orange line, and they have and kind of to punish overconsumption, and they learn to punish consumption more. Okay, and the main effect that we discovered so far, the effects of the initial state of the environment, is the environment is to which no learning nor selection initially takes place. So greedy behaviors are rewarded, and later on overconsumption ruins the resource. If the amount of common resource is limited early on, selections and learning take place. So basically, then society learns to behave in a responsible way, limiting consumption, developing readiness for punishment for overconsumptions. Okay. So basically, the message is that agent-based models can allow us to study emergent properties of social processes. Thank you. That's so much for my presentation.
Great. Thanks very much for the presentation, Andrzej. We've obviously got a little bit of time for questions. I didn't notice anything in the Q&A tab, but if anyone would like to ask any questions, do feel free to raise your hand virtually, and we can unmute you. Failing that, we can always finish a little bit early if there aren't any questions, but if we maybe give a bit of time there. I don't think there are any questions from the attendees, so I think with that being the case, we can probably wrap up a little bit early. Andrzej, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I found it absolutely fascinating. I originally started, I studied biology back in the day, so finding that parallel of slime mold I thought was especially interesting. I remember being fascinated with it and studying it in detail at the time.
Okay.
Real. Okay, great stuff. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for all the attendees today. Thank you very much for the talk, Andrzej, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.